Hello viewers, welcome to Cybercrime Alert on GH Police TV, where we bring you the latest insights on digital security and cybercrime prevention. Today's topic is two-factor authentication, a security measure that can help protect your online accounts from unauthorized access. With the increasing number of cyber threats and data breaches, it's more important than ever to take steps to secure your personal information online. Two-factor authentication adds an extra layer of security to your accounts by requiring a second form of identification, such as a code sent to your mobile phone number or a biometric scan in addition to your password. In today's show, we shall explore the benefits of two-factor authentication and provide practical steps and tips on how to set it up for your various accounts. We shall also discuss some of the common misconceptions about this security measure, and answer some of the most frequently asked questions. So if you want to learn how to better protect yourself from cybercrime and keep your online accounts secure, stay tuned on Cybercrime Alert on GH Police TV. I am your host, Detective Lance Corporal Danstan Guba of the Cybercrime Unit and Child Protection Digital Forensics Laboratory, Ghana Police Service. Now the question is, what is two-factor authentication? Two-factor authentication is a security process that requires users to provide two forms of identification in order to access an account or system. It is a form of multiple factor authentication. The first factor is usually a password or PIN that the user knows, and the second factor is typically something the user has, such as a security token, smart card, or mobile device. The second factor can also be something that the user is, such as fingerprints or other biometric identifier. The purpose of two-factor authentication is to provide an extra layer of security beyond just a password. Even if a hacker manages to obtain a user's password, they will not be able to access the account without the second factor. This makes it much more difficult for unauthorized users to gain access to sensitive information or system. The concept of two-factor authentication has been around for a long time, but it was not until recently that it has become more widely adopted as a security measure. It is difficult to attribute the development of two-factor authentication to a single individual or organization, as the concept has evolved over time and has been implemented in various forms by different organizations and security experts. However, it is generally acceptable that the earliest form of two-factor authentication dates back to the use of physical tokens such as token phones or smart cards, which were first introduced in the 1980s. Today, there are many different types of two-factor authentication methods, including SIM-based authentication, biometric authentication, hardware tokens, among others. The development and implementation of these various methods have been driven by the need to improve digital security and protect against growing cybersecurity threats. Now let's look at some of the importance of two-factor or multiple factor authentications and the reasons for that. So the first and obvious reason is that it enhances security. Two-factor authentication provides an extra layer of security beyond just a password, making it more difficult for attackers to gain access or unauthorized access to an account or system. Two-factor authentication, as we mentioned, requires the user to provide two forms of identification in order to access an account or system. And so it is very important that two-factor authentication enhances an extra layer of security, enhancing security in general for the account. Now, the second reason is the fact that it facilitates or it makes mitigation of password-related risk a bit lesser. Two-factor authentication helps mitigate the risk associated with password-related attacks such as credential stuffing, phishing, and brute force attacks. The other reason is that it's a compliance requirement. Now, many organizations are required to implement two-factor authentication or multiple-factor authentication as part of compliance regulations. And I'm sure in Ghana, in terms of compliance, organizations are required to implement this multiple-factor authentication in their system to protect user accounts. And then we have the protection of sensitive data too. Multiple-factor authentication or two-factor authentication can help protect sensitive information such as financial data, personal health information, or intellectual property from unauthorized access. Using two-factor authentication also gives you a peace of mind. By implementing the two-factor authentication, users can have greater peace of mind knowing that their accounts and information are better protected from cyber threats. In terms of two-factor authentication, an algorithm is a mathematical formula or process used to generate a one-time password and other forms of authentication codes. The algorithm typically uses a shared secret key and other parameters to generate a unique key that is only valid for a short period of time. This is to let us also understand that there are various forms of multiple-factor authentication or two-factor authentication that uses different algorithm. So algorithm, in a layman's understanding, should mean ways and means that these two-factor authentication comes in. So that is typically the algorithm, and we will get to understand some of the several algorithms used in two-factor authentication depending on the method and the hardware that is being considered. Now, the first algorithm that is implemented in multiple-factor authentication is what we call time-based one-time password. It is shortened as TOTP. So the time-based one-time password is a widely used algorithm for generating a one-time password. So it is based on the time and a short secret key, which is typically stored on both the server and the user's device. So it means that with this algorithm, when the password is generated for the two-factor authentication, it is stored over a period of time, but it is mostly a short period of time. It is stored on the user's device and also on the service provider's server. And so whenever it changes on the service provider's server, it changes on the user's device too. This is very typical when you use the Google Authenticator. You realize that after every 30 seconds or 1 minute, it changes. And so once it changes on your device, it changes on the server's device, and so you are able to use that same 6-digit code within that 30 minutes for your authentication. Otherwise, it expires and then it regenerates. And this is the mechanism used by the time-based one-time password. An option in multiple-factor authentication. So whenever you are doing your multiple-factor authentication or two-factor authentication, and you realize that they are telling you to generate a key using an authenticator, then it means that you are actually deploying the time-based one-time password. Like I mentioned, you have a 6-digit code that changes every 30 seconds, which the user must enter to authenticate. If not, after the 30 seconds, it changes to a new key, which is a 6-digit, and you can use it again. So that is how it works for that. Then we have the 𝐏𝐻𝐋 based one-time password. So this, the second form of multiple factor authentication algorithm, is what we term as the 𝐏𝐻𝐋 based one-time password. So unlike the previous algorithm that we mentioned, it generates a 6-digit code, and after every 30 seconds it changes. With this one, it will generate a 6-digit secret key, and it has a counter, but it will change, the 6-digit code changes after it is used. So it means that it's more like a one-time password or PIN that you can use, but as long as you don't use the key to authenticate the service or the platform, then it doesn't expire. So with this algorithm, it generates a 6 or 8. It could be 6 or 8 that does not expire until it is used, and which the user must enter along with their password for authentication. And then we have the push notifications. So for some two-factor authentication methods, they use the push notifications to authenticate users. In this case, when the user attempts to log in, a push notification is sent to their registered device, prompting them to approve or deny the request. This is typical when you are using Facebook and then you are requested to approve a user's login when you try to log in on another device. It's typical like that. And in most cases too, iOS devices use this, especially when you are authenticating an iCloud account. You get a notification that someone is trying to have access into your account, and so you need to approve. And this is the algorithm that it uses, which we call the push notifications. And then we have the biometric authentication. So with the biometric authentication, this uses algorithms to verify a user's identity based on their unique physical characteristics, such as fingerprints, face, or voice. So as you can see on the screen, we have 5 types of biometric authentication. Now, with most devices or most platforms, they would opt for facial recognition because, like we mentioned, it is a unique physical character, and so they implement such verifications. Others also use voice recognition, which we get to see whenever we want to get or alternate between facial recognition and fingerprint. You realize that most of the devices we use or the services also request for voice recognition. And then we have fingerprint recognition, which is very common with Android phones, where you would have to authenticate with your fingerprint before you can get a passage. And then we have the iris scanners. This has to do with eye recognition. So you just have to place the phone, and then the camera captures your eye, the unique identifiers there, and then they give you access. And then we have handwriting recognition, which is not so common with Microsoft and other operating systems. They adopt these ones. So you have a unique handwriting, and then the system recognizes it. And once you are not able to pass through either of these biometric authentication, you don't get access to the service or your account or your devices. Now, there are some challenges that comes with two-factor authentication, and like we mentioned, not until recently, it has become a very popular security measure, which everybody is embracing. However, one of the very challenging topics that comes into play is the fact that the adoption by users is always a problem. One of the biggest challenge with this is getting users to adopt and use the technology. Some users may find it inconvenient to have to enter a one-time password or use a second device to authenticate, which may lead to low adoption rates. But the education out there is that two-factor authentication adds an extra layer of security, although the processes might be a bit technical and a bit worrisome, but it is an extra layer of security. We are advising that if you are not on it, on any platform that you find yourself on online, you should adopt it. Now, it's also important for you to report the incident to the police. If you suspect that your two-factor authentication has been hacked, your account has been hacked, you should report the incident to the nearest police station for the needed assistance. And like I always mention, you can reach the Ghana Police Service on our emergency numbers 191 or 18555. We encourage you to take action today and enable two-factor authentication or multiple factor authentication or two-step verification on your various mobile devices, your various accounts online, including social media, email, and financial services. By doing so, you can help safeguard your digital identity and protect yourself from cybercrime. Thank you for tuning in into Cybercrime Alert on GH Police TV. Again, I am your host, Detective Lance Corporal Danstan Guba of the Cybercrime Unit and Child Protection Digital Forensics Lab, Ghana Police Service. Stay safe, stay secure, and keep watching GH Police TV.
He was on camera.